I haven't seen it yet.
Well, I noticed that your name was on the credits.
Yeah, he gave me credit. I don't remember what I did. I don't know whether I sent him money or whether I said, "Go, man, go." I don't remember, but I'm awfully glad to be identified with something that's winning.
Well, I was curious to know why do you think that film is in commercial theaters? It was astounding to me to see it there.
Well, I gather it's highly, highly entertaining. That's the first reason why it's there. It's not accurate, as you've read, not totally accurate. He's come in for attack from some good people for not giving them credit. But in the main, I think he attacks an American problem from what I've heard of it, and that is plant closure, which this country doesn't do a goddamn thing about. And our people are so ignorant, if you'll forgive my saying so. We know nothing about the rest of the world, about the fact that on the average 6 to 8 European countries, the average pay for their workers is higher than American receive. We have no idea at all whatsoever about what happens in plant closings in Europe, whereby I think on the average a worker is granted 6 months to 3 years to either relocate or get paid. But it's the benefits that we are denied here while we are busy crowing about being number one and taking care of our own, are the contradiction in terms is truly ridiculous. I guess that's why Roger and me is drawing a lot of people into commercial theater. Yes, sir.
You might be interested in knowing, that
You call me Lou.
this is in the context of what I'm going to say, that the Des Moines Register regularly publishes the record of our representatives and senators.
I would say they're one of the few then. Is it prominently displayed?
I think it's right up there.
I think you have to, but if it's there, then I when I find it, I always happen to stumble over it, having just finished a want ad or something. It's about that size print. When I've seen it in the New York Times, it's tiny. It should be emblazoned. Yes, Miss. And I'm sorry, am I aware what?
Has there been anybody in your business that has been actively involved in the recent release of Nelson Mandela?
Not that I know of. Some people think politics is my business. So I could say, well, Jesse Jackson was just there. No, I mean, Harry Belafonte has been steeped in terms of fighting apartheid from beyond time, and I have no idea whether he was involved at all. I think Mr. de Klerk is a very surprisingly bright individual that nobody. God knows where all this is going to go, but I myself have been amazed at the changes. Eastern Europe is stealing all the thunder, but what is going on in South Africa would be dominating our headlines like mad if it weren't for Eastern Europe. So I'm tremendously impressed with the man, and hope he can find the way to bring South Africa back to the Society of Nations. Yes.
Started off talking about the arrows in Mississippi burning, and then we talked about the supposing congressmen's names, etc. Ron Kovic's film has been alleged is untrue in the sense that there may not have been a police raid at Syracuse University, or
right.
that some scenes at the Republican convention were false. In other words, it was an autobiographical film that maybe it was a montage or something else. I'm sure you're concerned about the question of truth. I mean, if this is to be a political medium and a propaganda medium from such movies as the Movie Bell Code, we've had propaganda movies for years. But the problem is the truth, and I wonder if you'd like to readdress the question about false statements or statements, like beauty's in the eye of the beholder. Some people see it one way, some another. Maybe that's why people have tried to sanitize these things, and yet I do agree with you that we want this in there, but what about false impressions?
Well, I condemn the error made in 4th of July because that attacked people who worked very hard to create order and peace at Syracuse, from what I've read about it. So I do condemn that, and I think that Oliver just didn't check his source, who I gather was Ron Kovic. In terms of, I think it's dastardly, if, as some people say, and I'd be willing to believe it, certainly the black community seems to generate that idea, that the FBI were villainous at the time of Mississippi burning, then I hope that legacy is somehow exposed in some other movie to counteract what was engendered in Mississippi burning. But when it comes to an example of a movie that I really enjoyed immensely, a recent movie, and that's Glory. Has it played I found it to be a wonderful movie, wonderful performances about a very true event. And supposedly the only departure from truth in it was that the final attack, which is an unbelievable piece of movie action, a final attack on the fort was launched from the beach. That was a gross violation of truth, but I'm sure that the reason they did it was to make it more powerful, to make it more broad scope in terms of cinematography. So departures from the truth such as that, I don't mind, because it does not discredit the essential truth. That's a lame answer to what you're saying. But I think I agree with you that there should be a great outcry if we can find what the truth is. If the truth is obvious, then I think it should be proclaimed and heralded from the mountaintops and treetops, and a movie should be discredited if it veers too vigorously, no matter what its purpose, from the truth. And lastly, when they made the miniseries Holocaust, and I know many survivors. I have relatives who are survivors, and one of them said they dismissed Holocaust. It was unimportant. It was baloney. On and on and on. That the human mind cannot fathom what the Holocaust was like, and certainly that miniseries did not do it. And I could not disagree with her. I had to agree with her. And yet at the same time, I knew that people who had never in their lives conceived for 1 second of what the Holocaust might have been, watched that and perhaps gleaned one item of information that many people died by a certain method at the hands of others during a certain time in life in a horrendous fashion. And if they glean that from that miniseries, then I say thank God it was made. I also would go on to say, just as the facts and figures I quoted earlier about how many people read a newspaper, how many people see a movie, how many people see television. There was a phenomenal TV documentary series from Britain called Worlds at War, narrated by Laurence Olivier. And one episode was the greatest piece of documentary footage on the concentration camps I've ever seen. It was gruesome, it was horrible, it was endless. And yet I realized that nobody, the vast majority of people watching TV would turn that thing off, would not learn about the Holocaust, and yet probably watched the miniseries and learned from that. So I'm at war between, I agree, if it's a gross departure from the truth, I would proclaim it if somebody will listen to you. If it's a success, you're out of luck.
I wonder if you would characterize the level and direction of your colleagues in the acting profession, in Hollywood in particular. Are there many who are as concerned, I know there aren't many as concerned as you about social issues, but those who are, would you say they're mostly conservative, or are they mostly liberal in their attitudes? How would you characterize your not your hometown, but your professional town?
I think most would be afraid of how they display their liberalism. I think some of my lack of activity is partially used as that example. One of the quotes, the first interview done on me was in New York Magazine by, I can't remember his name, a wonderful writer. And he quoted a producer, didn't quote him by name, and the gist of his comments were, schmuck, at the height of Reaganism, he's a liberal. And, and all I could do is, gape at reading. Oh, yeah, I'm really being a jerk. I should be politic and be Mr. Center. Well, I guess a lot of people practice. I did for years. I kept my mouth shut for years, and it gave me gas. And I wasn't happy with myself. So finally, the moment came right when people wanted me to speak out on something, and I did, and I couldn't shut up. Stop it. I'll take care of you later. We carry an enormous influence. And the reason I chose to speak out is because my concern about media and the control of that media, whether it's 50 companies or 26 companies, that control, I think, goes on endlessly. It's a weird syndrome of silence, whereby things which are anti-establishment are not broadcastedly covered in the press of this country. It may appear in the Philadelphia Bulletin today and not another place elsewhere. Some miscreancy. I can well remember that on the front page of the LA Times, a little box this size in June announced the Watergate break-in. And not until after the election, well into December or January, did the juggernaut of Watergate begin to develop. And that's because it was too overwhelming, too powerful. But in terms of Latin America, which I tried to make my field, it is unbelievable the silences that are maintained. And I would say that I was used as a partial means of shutting me up for my liberalism at the time of Reaganism. It's a business. And most people follow the precepts of business, of not getting too hotly politically involved on issues. If it comes to ecology, some of them will take big steps. Because the overwhelming majority of actors are liberal and would be Democrats. But they don't advertise it. They would pursue ecological interests, the homeless, trying to find some way. In terms of foreign policy, in terms of gun control, in terms of abortion, plenty do take a stand on abortion. But I'm sure that some prefer not to, no matter what they think. And there are those performers who feel they should keep their mouth shut, that they have no right to. And of course I am in total disagreement with them. Sure.
In your judgment, what would it take to change that?
Nothing. It's the human condition. Will always be with us. I would say one of the great driving during succeeding the period of the cancellation of Lou Grant, I was prepared to never work again. And it was only the unceasing attacks I got tired of. I said, well, okay, you asked for it. And I decided not to retire. And part of my desire was to get back on television, to show, in addition to making a living, to show other actors that there was life after death, to try to empower them by that. I'm still working on it. I haven't succeeded. Yes?
It's permissible for Linda Ellery to do a commercial to raise money for the production company, but it's not permissible for a theater chain to show commercials to supplement their income from donations.
I agree with you. I don't think it's permissible. I think it's permissible for her to do a commercial, and I think that if a theater chain wants to, it can. But at the same time, it's a breaking with our tradition, which is why I object to it. Certainly, it's an inroad, and I would take issue that the prices being charged, that theater chain is not making money. You've cut out all the extras. The personnel are paid minimum wage, I guess at best. They've broken the projectionist union. Where else except in paying property taxes are the expenses coming from, unless the distributors are charging an arm and a leg from the exhibitors, and most of the time they're working hand in glove. So I think that if we're paying that kind of price, I think we should be entitled not to have to see something that we would be seeing at home on television. I think it should, dignity, I think, decency should demand there should be a difference. It's my opinion. Would you care to argue the opposite?
No, but I do know that the distribution charges usually in the first week anywhere from 80 to 90% of the box office take goes back to the film company, not to the theater chain. So I do know that there's a tremendous expense involved in the operation.
I realize that is it strictly the exhibitor's choice to show those commercials?
That I couldn't tell you. I do know that the viewer's choice is usually to get there about 5 minutes late so you miss it.
Yeah.
But it just seems like in a capitalist society, if you have to make money for a production company to make documentaries like Linda Ellery's doing, the theater has to survive too, and why shouldn't it be subject to the same rules of capitalism?
Well, once again, we'd have to look at the books. You think that's possible? Yes.
I'd like to get off this politics thing for a minute. The show Ron.
Let's talk about girls. You know any nice ones?
Yes. The show Bronx Zoo, which I find surprised is taken off the air for such a short time, to me captured a lot of concerns of our younger generation. And I was wondering what might be done either by yourself or by other people in the industry to produce a show or to do something to answer those concerns?
Well, exhuming Bronx Zoo would be a, I don't know. I mean, I think that, I don't want to dwell on this, but in the manner in which NBC exhibited that show was abominable and defeatist and doomed the show to cancellation. The only way you're going to do it is take the same ingredients that you had at the Bronx Zoo and perk it up. Perk up your presentation and have faith in it. They had no faith and they sabotaged it from start to finish. There are other shows coming along, I suppose. I mean, what to do? There are good shows on the air, there are bad shows. How to supplant the values created by Bronx Zoo, I wouldn't know. And that was a dream of Gary Goldberg's. It started out as a half hour, it failed as a half hour. He finally was able to effectuate it into an hour. And I would say that though he put his dream into practice, he was executive producer on it and did no work at all on the show. I don't think he worked on it. I don't think he fought for it. So I condemn him too. And how to get Bronx Zoo 2 on the air, I couldn't begin to tell you. I'm trying to get a job.
Well, what can you do if you feel there is a quality show on television to keep it on? Does it really work direct to the advertisers, to the networks, to your local stations? What works there?
Well, I would mobilize your friends. I would send in multiple letters yourself. I would constantly keep up that feed. I would talk it up.
Do the advertisers have the most influence of all of them?
No, when they canceled Lou Grant, advertisers were standing in line to take the place of those who were canceling out because of my political involvement. What?
Networks would be who maybe you should concentrate on?
Absolutely. Yes.
Would you comment on the influence of entertainment on news and public affairs programs that will get viewers for the advertisers?
Well, I'm fairly obsessed now. We were talking about it at dinner. Fairness and accuracy in reporting has done a couple of surveys, and there is no fairness and accuracy in reporting as much as people may regard it, because we are inadequately represented on the left on TV. They did an analysis on the Koppel Show, and the glaring lack over a number of weeks and months of true representation from the affected areas was total. I believe that was certainly in Central America. I'm not sure if it was in labor also. They just did one on McNeil Lehrer, which is always used as the paragon of progressive reporting. In every instance of reporting on labor, they never had a labor person there. There was always somebody speaking for labor, theoretically. There was a time there where the two spokesmen who were called on to talk shows, who weren't on regular shows, to speak for the left were McNamara, Kennedy's Secretary of Defense, who learned from his kids that we were lying about Vietnam, and William Colby, the head of the CIA during the Vietnam period. Those two were the two representatives of the left on American television talk show. Now I think it's been modified since then. I don't know. Maybe Robert Novak is now thought of as a representative of the left, but it is a subtle distinction that most people don't cotton on to. But radicals are rarely, if ever, seen. Even moderates aren't seen. And of course, we're being misinformed by that type of presentation. Yes?
I was wondering if
you yourself had any influence on the screenwriting? Like, for example, in the Lou Grant series, he did the issue of Indians, and then Bronx Zoo, you dealt with issues of teen pregnancy and drugs. Did you yourself have any?
No. I was delighted by the choices each time. With each show, I myself learned. They helped make me a liberal. They never made me into the ardent liberal that I am, but they certainly provided me a good basis for rational, reasoned dialogue. And I constantly learn from what the producer-writers selected to have done on both shows. I never suggested a topic. During the course of Lou Grant, I realized that there were 3 things that we probably couldn't touch. One was abortion, one was gun control, and at that time, busing. And we certainly didn't. Abortion has just slightly begun to be mentioned, I guess, on some TV shows. Well, actually not really. It took a special to do it. You still don't see gun control. And busing is somewhat a thing of the past.
We have time for one more question.
Yes.
If you choose to speak out about an issue that may lessen your own influence and result in the fact that I wanted to know when you decide maybe better not to speak out about the way the value.
Well, I tried to take the advice of a number of people. Some of the slippage was going so fast, it was like an avalanche, that no amount of advisors could help, because as soon as I opened my mouth, I became, to the eyes of the world, a stormy petrel. That no matter what I was saying, it was the eye of a storm. It recently happened that while I was president of the Screen Actors Guild, an implied request for money came to me from a California legislator. I was furious at the time. The lobbyist that was with me was well aware that we had been asked for money. I did nothing about it. Some years later, last year, his actions had become so flagrant that the FBI finally did a job of lacing up a strong case against him. Well, the news about me had gotten out. He had also done the same kind of thing with the Professional Football Players Union. I thought that he had never mentioned the word money, that it didn't really amount to any means of hauling him into court. But the government attorneys kept saying, no, it's the same. It means something. He could be found guilty with the kind of evidence of what we've heard about it. And against my will, because I didn't think, my memory, everything leaves me. Once I've been involved in so many controversies, once I'm past them, I try to forget about them. I could not remember place, time, words, etc. The lobbyist was supplying everything. And they just found him guilty on like 7 charges. 3 charges they did not find him guilty on, and one of those was mine. And I thought that I probably was brought in for window dressing to this whole goddamn thing. So once again, I was brought in, my name was used. When they described the charges that were dropped, my name was the only one that was included or mentioned. So kicking and screaming, I was dragged into this thing. It was against my will, but nothing could prevent me. I had to testify. I had to testify the bare, scant knowledge I had of what he said. And it wasn't enough to convict him on that charge. I have cited to you earlier the fact that I did not sign on to the in fact thing, because it would be I was trying to get a show off the ground. And to me, it would be making it totally impossible or making it very hard on myself to do so if I spoke out against my actual employer. So I chose not to. Most of the time, I float the idea among a circle of advisors and then go with my own thoughts. I just went to Israel for the first time, and I was going with what was regarded as a pro-Palestinian group. So all of my Jewish friends and advisors were screaming bloody murder at me. And so we stated that I would go alone, I would meet the Palestinian people in Israel, and that we would take a list of who they were going to have me see. I submitted that list to my Jewish friends. They eliminated some names. In Israel, they added others, along with government people they wanted me to see. And it proved to be the most balanced visit that I ever could have had, because I did not go solidly with any one group. And I came back with a phenomenal 12-day history of memories behind me and thoughts. And so it worked out. So I try to achieve balance without a total rejection of something as being too controversial.
What was your response to going?
You got 12 days. I belong to the Peace Now group and to those working for peace in the Middle East, and I believe in a West Bank state. It confirmed my belief in a West Bank state, and at the same time it even increased my love of Israel. But it heightened my emotions on both sides. My anger against the anti-peaceniks, and my desire to it's one of the most beautiful places I've ever been to in my life. I was unbelievably affected, and I did not think I could be taken by it as I was. And I yearn for finding some solution, and I will be doing everything I can to work for that. Yes, sir.
Many of us admire you for courage and speaking out in life. But you mentioned as one rationale for actors speaking out of topics, the fact that they become sort of instant experts in the subject. Isn't that a little bit analogous, though, to giving a layman 2 weeks training and telling him to fly B-47? The level of knowledge you gain, is it sort of a facile knowledge compared to that of experts?
It is a facile knowledge. But I think that 5 years of playing an editor exposed me not to necessarily good journalism, but to what was rotten about journalism. And if I practiced and pursued it on my own at night as well as by day, I think it gives me a certain limited qualification to speak out. I'm not talking about a 2 weeks crash course. I'm talking about a constant exposure to a character and to an industry, to a profession. I was a high school journalist, and my teacher came to me one day and he said, you thinking of going into the field? I said, yeah. He said, I wouldn't. I said, so why not? She can't make a living. I said, oh. So I went on to become an overnight success as an actor. But when Lou Grant started, and steeped in the reality that the show was, with 2 advisors on the set most of the time, and loving the stink of newsprint and the action, sedate as it was of the profession. I began to wonder. I said, I always loved this profession, and so great to be in love again with it. So what killed it for me? Why did it die? What did it? Until eventually I began to be involved in terms of Latin America. And slowly I began to see the fabric of lies and deceit that etched their way throughout the whole fabric of the press in our country. The fact that the press is free to a man who owns one, and the fact that, well, I'm making it my own case. You were seeking clarification on the other. Anyway, I assiduously began to compile the statistics that made me feel that way about the press and read further on it on my own. And I think it is the case. I think it's a serious problem, not just ownership, but the way news is covered in this country. There's a phenomenal article that appeared in Harper's, which I was gifted with recently, of July '89, by a gentleman named Cart, who totally destroys the myth about our press and lays it at the feet of Congress, who empower the press not to report the news. And I would recommend those of you who can to exhume that article. I don't know if I've answered your question. I feel very poor at answering most questions tonight. It's a very good audience. Be willing to identify, first of all, with the peace movement. Be willing to say what your beliefs are in terms of a state, in terms of, in Israel itself, it was pointed out to me the unbelievability of the Likud statement that no PLO can participate in the peace negotiations. And I forget who the Israeli was that gave me that response, but they said it's like sitting down with the Russians on a disarmament conference and telling the Russians who they can have on the committee. Seen in that light, I think they'll eventually budge, so I shouldn't dwell on this too much. But it's taken up so much time, and in the meantime, people keep dying. And I would like to see that stop. You don't have to applaud again, but I recognize this man. We won't applaud again. You had a question?
It's my understanding that most, or all networks, usually don't like to carry programs that are generally offensive to the American people and that are, quote, cost more than other programs. In other words, cost more than the average program. So what I don't understand is why they would cancel a program like Bronx Zoo, which carries issues that might be offensive to some people, but would allow other programs such as Military Cruise to carry on.
First of all, it was a 10 o'clock show. It was canceled because it wasn't making money for them. And the reason it wasn't making money for them was because we made 21 episodes over a 2-year period. Normally what you'd make for a 1-year period. Only 18 of those episodes were ever shown over a 2-year period. They never showed more than 3 consecutively on the same night at the same hour. And you can never win an audience with such scattershot programming. So by that programming, as created by NBC, they doomed the show. Not because of its controversiality. It was never controversial enough to be protested by advertisers or anybody. It presented high schools as they exist in terms of birth control, in terms of daycare center, in terms of use of condoms. All this exists in high schools. And there were no protests on that. It did not generate money because of their stupid programming techniques.
I'm afraid we're all out of time.
That last one, and I'll go.
You deserve the media they get. If you are apathetic, you get rubbish, and if you demand it, you get quality.
Then why do we get some quality and some rubbish? I mean, why can't it be... you see, many times, I realize Britain has gone to advertising and to multiple networks. But many times I've longed in this country that there was only one network so that we could achieve some of the beauty that the BBC achieved over the many years. So that Mobil Oil wouldn't have to go buying English programming to put on PBS in this country. If we had one network, maybe Mobil Oil could buy, some American programming for a change. But unfortunately, we were cursed with 3 networks and a satellite PBS network, and now we got cable. And maybe out of all that mess, there will be more individual programming rather than charlatans chasing each other, trying to emulate what the others were. At the time NBC had us on, they were number 1 by far. And yet you would have thought they were number 3, because all they could do with new ideas was to try to catch up and emulate what second and third networks were doing. They were copying each other. Yeah. Thank you very, very much.